From August 1899 to September 1901, the Society of the Righteous and Harmonious Fist, a radical group of young Chinese peasants, stormed the Chinese countryside with the objective of driving all foreigners and Christians from China. Called Boxers by the Westerners, they took a stand against imperialism and for a glorified China free of the tampering of white men. While their rebellion was ultimately crushed by foreign forces, the legacy of the Boxers continued to inspire the spirit of revolution in China, influencing great leaders and setting the stage for the tumultuous 20th century. The 19th century was a period of conflict and change in China. Europeans had taken an interest in China and its riches, and Western powers like Britain, America, and Germany were determined to break through Chinese policies keeping the majority of Europeans from entering its borders. The British began selling opium to the Chinese, addicting a huge number of merchants in order to keep them dependent on British trade. This outraged the Chinese government, leading to a war between China and Britain, which Britain easily won. The outcome of this war was the 1842 Treaty of Nanking, which allowed British citizens to enter and live in China without being subject to Chinese laws. Not only was the Chinese government facing invasion from outside forces, their own people were growing disillusioned with the ruling Qing dynasty, which had been in power since the 1600s. In the 1850s, the anti-Qing Taiping Rebellion and a series of subsequent revolts left over 20 million dead, and the government scrambling to reform. As the 19th century drew to a close, the Qing was at its weakest, held together by the recently self-enthroned Empress Dowager Cixi. Meanwhile, a storm was brewing in the countryside. Shandong Province is located in northern China, about 250 miles south of Beijing. It's a densely populated agricultural region, and at the time, over 90% of the population were peasants, whose lives depended on the unpredictable summer rains. Poverty and crime rates were high. Additionally, the people of Shandong, as well as of the neighboring provinces of Shanxi and Zhili, had a strong martial arts tradition and a deep-set belief in local folk spirituality. In the 1890s, the Christian missionary presence in Shandong increased significantly. By the second half of the decade, the missionaries had become a polarizing issue. A series of droughts led to famine. Desperate times meant that more people than ever were turning to Christianity, and that those suspicious of Christianity became increasingly threatened by it. The missionaries often interrupted rituals and prayers for rain, preaching loudly against the local religion and deeply insulting many Chinese. Rumors began to spread that the missionaries were poisoning wells, and that the Chinese converts to Christianity were being tortured by the missionaries in secret. Around this time, a martial arts society called the Spirit Boxers emerged. Unlike previous societies, they began actively recruiting members all around Shandong. In 1898, they changed their name to Yi Chuan, the Righteous and Harmonious Fist, and made their public slogan Fu Qing Mieyang, support the Qing, destroy the foreigners. The Boxer movement had begun. The Catholic and Protestant religions being so insolent to the gods and extinguishing sanctity, rendering no obedience to Buddha and enraging heaven and earth, the rain clouds will no longer visit us, but 8 million spirit soldiers will descend from heaven and sweep the empire clean of all foreigners. Then will the gentle showers once more water our lands. The Yi Chuan gained momentum quickly, starting in Shandong and spreading to Shanxi and Zhili. What began as one of many small martial arts societies soon became a region-wide cause with no one leader. Encouraged by the local government, they harassed foreigners and drove Christians, both white and Chinese, from their villages throughout the autumn of 1898. The heart of the movement was rooted in spirituality. The Boxers practiced mass spirit possession, rituals that were said to call down the power of the gods and make them invulnerable to bullets. Most of the Boxers were boys and young men, excited to be part of a seemingly noble fight. With the power of the gods on their side, how could they lose? In January 1900, Empress Dowager Cixi expressed her official support of the Boxers. By this point, the Boxers' numbers had grown to measure in the hundreds of thousands, and their reach had spread across northern China. Christians and Europeans were not safe in their own homes as hostility turned to church burning, then to cutting off telegraph and railway lines between major cities, then to massacring Christians and pillaging entire towns. With the support of the government behind them, the Boxers seemed unstoppable. From the diary of Fei Chihao, a Chinese Christian. Late in July, a proclamation of the governor was posted in the city in which occurred the words, "Exterminate foreigners, kill devils." Native Christians must leave the church, or pay the penalty with their lives. As the situation grew more chaotic, foreign diplomats living in Beijing requested aid from their home countries. The Western militaries hastily built an 8-nation allied force designed to eliminate the Boxers before they could infiltrate Beijing. As many as 20,000 troops from Britain, America, France, Italy, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, and even Japan became unlikely allies against the common enemy of the Boxers. On the opposing side, Empress Dowager Cixi officially declared war on the foreigners, making the Boxers her unofficial army. In June, Boxers made it to Beijing while the Allied troops were caught 70 miles away, forced to retreat to the city of Tianjin after relentless attacks from both the Boxers and Chinese imperial militia. Within Beijing's walls, all of the European diplomats and their families blockaded themselves in the Foreign Legations District, preparing for the worst. For 55 days between June and August, fighting raged in Beijing. The Boxers, reduced to an angry mob, barraged the perimeter of the Foreign Legations District, and the Westerners held them off. In the south, the Allied troops battled their way northward, greeted by more Boxers at every turn. On August 5th, the troops reached Beijing. It took another 9 days of fighting before they were able to subdue the Boxers and free the remaining diplomats. Afterward, the Western soldiers looted the city. When the Empress Dowager had heard that Allied troops were approaching Beijing, she and her court fled the city, knowing that their cause was lost. After the fighting ended, she returned, shamed, to negotiate terms of defeat with the Europeans. A peace treaty known as the Boxer Protocol was signed in September of 1901. The treaty ordered China to pay a large indemnity to the other nations involved and take precautions to ensure that there wouldn't be another anti-foreign uprising. After the treaty was settled, scores of Boxers were tried and executed in the streets. Over the course of the entire rebellion, hundreds of Europeans were killed, and tens of thousands of Chinese Christians were massacred. In the eyes of the West, the Boxer Rebellion was a senseless atrocity and an example of the evils of xenophobia. While this is mostly true, there's a deeper significance to the events of the Boxer Rebellion often overlooked by Western scholars. The years directly after the rebellion, preceding the Revolution of 1911, were crucial to the development of China as it is today. Cixi was allowed to continue her rule, but after the crippling effects of the Boxer Protocol, the Qing was on the decline. The nationalist leader Sun Yat-sen, who had lived through both the Taiping and Boxer rebellions and learned from their mistakes, was able to take advantage of the political climate created by the rebellion in order to take his own stand in the 1911 overthrow of the Qing dynasty and establishment of the People's Republic of China. The nationalists disavowed the Boxers for being savage and uncontrolled, but later, after the 1966 Cultural Revolution, the Communists portrayed the Boxers not as savages but as patriotic heroes. As for the West, the Boxer Rebellion was the first major political interaction the U.S. had with China. The hostility and mutual distrust of our first impression of China would last a long time, existing in racist stereotypes of Chinese people and a fear of China in our foreign policy. Enhanced by the spread of communism, that fear still exists. It doesn't matter that the Boxers were ultimately defeated. Their shadow haunts East and West a century later.